Chair's going to recognize himself for a few questions, and then we'll be prepared to close with closing statements. So, Mr. Hollister, let me come back to you, because I think in your testimony you indicated that the Department of Treasury actually has monthly statements where the total fines, fees, and settlements, I guess, as it relates to it. It may not be able to be tracked back to the genesis of where it started, but there is a total number. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. There is a total number, and there are detailed tables. The trouble is, it's a static document.
It's a what?
It's a static document. You
okay, a static document, and we know that your fine group is not static, right? One of the reasons why I get so excited about what you're doing is it adds a level of transparency where we'll be able to drill down and really start to look at it in a real meaningful way. Would you agree with that?
It ought to be interactive, sir.
So as we look at that, can you explain any reason why Treasury would not be able to give this committee, in response to a request that we've made, the total amount of fines and penalties that they've collected? What would be a reasonable rationale for them not being able to give this to this committee?
My best suggestion, sir, would be that the Treasury Department tried to minimize the scope of the request, as Legislative Affairs offices have been known to do. I've worked for the committee. I know how that works. And interpreted the request as a request for just the Treasury Department's own receipt of fines, fees, and settlements, which involves all sorts of
So what you're saying is we have a failure to communicate.
Yes, sir.
So if we have a failure to communicate, I think it would be prudent for us to make sure that as a staff, and they've already indicated that they're going to reach out to Treasury to get this number, because as my colleague, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, mentioned, we're talking, it's starting to add up to real money here. We're talking about $600 billion. Is that correct? Based on the testimony from the White House budget and the $83 billion that we got in a report, $600 billion. Would you agree, how about this, Ms. Krause, would you agree that $600 billion is a large sum?
That is a large sum.
All right, and being that the President-elect Donald Trump wants to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure, that gets us half the way there with fees, fines, and settlement, doesn't it? You don't have to answer that. I'll just leave it at that. But so as we go here, I guess I use the humorous example in one area that's not so humorous to me. So let me come back to GAO. MSHA was mentioned earlier, and the reason why I drilled down on statute and what we can do with fines, fees, is because there is no guideline for MSHA in terms of the fines that they may give and the scope of that. It depends on the individual inspector on what he would give. And what I was troubled with is, and I didn't know this because I was just a new member of Congress going out to find out what was happening out there, and as I've recently found out that actually there was an empty Coke can on a desk at a mining group that they got a fine of well over $500 for having a Coke can sit on their work table. That happens in my office probably on a regular basis. So if MSHA had come in and fined me, I would have had this unbelievable fine. And then I went up on the—
Wait a minute, can we have the address of your—
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure it's in Rayburn because you've got plenty of seniority. And so as we look at this, here's my concern. If we leave it up to a non-specified, arbitrary fine and fee schedule, it's one thing to say, okay, a fee covers the cost of this particular thing, and this is where we collect it, and it goes. That's one issue. But the other is, the gentleman from Ohio pointed out, on the settlement and the fines, that's a number that could go up or down based on no particular criteria. Would you agree with that? How many of the agencies have a defined, if you do X, it's going, the fine is Y?
I don't know the,
Does the EPA have that?
I don't know specifically.
I know the answer, but I mean, do they have, if you violate a particular rule, that the fine is always a set amount? In your experience, would you say that there is, that you could make an analysis that is linear in terms of their fee and fine structure?
I don't know that we could, sir.
Okay. So here's what I would ask of each one of you. We would ask each of you to report to this committee, if you can, 3 recommendations on what you would like to see. And if you would get back to this committee, and that might even include looking at the particular piece of legislation and problems that you may have with that legislation that may not fulfill the intended consequence. Mr. Khan, I'm sure you can weigh in on that. There's a couple of others that Ranking Member and I have talked about, but 3 recommendations that we have. Here is the other question that I would ask for you, is to prepare at least 2 questions that we can ask OMB, the IRS, and Department of Treasury when we have the follow-up hearing, for them to be able to hopefully illuminate on some of these unanswered questions. Because you would think if any group would have a proper accounting of what's coming in and what's going out and where it's coming from, it would be OMB, Treasury, and the IRS. Would you all agree with that? Most of you nodding your head yes. And so let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. And so as we go with that, I just want to thank you. I'm going to recognize the gentleman for Virginia for his closing statement.